Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of Making Like Two Humans Being. Kate Foggo, as you can see, is in the other little Zoom screen, and I am Julie Hiert. And today we're going to talk about as what we think right now the topic is. We'll see where it goes. The lingering effects of parents' subtitles on our lives. So Kate and I have some unique situations, as you know, everybody does. So we thought we'd kind of talk through that, as well as just being soul level intuitive coaches, what we've uncovered, what we've discovered, and where we go from there. That's kind of where we're going to start. But I'm going to hand it over to Kate because she's been reading a really interesting book of late.
Yeah, so as I said last time, I'm embarking on this voyage of self-love, and I keep getting sidetracked or waylaid by different books. One of our fans, Debbie, recommended this book. I started reading it. I started doing it. I'm about halfway through it. It is good. I'm not sure. I've read so many books. I'm just like, I'm also one of these people, once I start a book, I feel I have to finish it. That'll be a workaround. But I spent the last weekend with my friend Louisa, and she had mentioned this book. We were talking not specifically about parents, but it had come up, and I had mentioned my experience growing up, and she said, "Oh, she knew this book and it had been recommended for someone, so it arrived." She said, I'll find out what it is and send it to you. And it arrived, and it's called, I'll put it in the show notes, but it's called Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. So it's a bit of me like, oh, it's another book, but actually it's very interesting. So I don't want to do more mother bashing per se, but it has helped me see again what makes me unique in this, not unique, obviously we're all unique, but this continued frustration I have over healing something that I think I should be over by now. I think I've got to the bottom of it. I'm tired of it. I get the picture. I've been over it and over it and over it and done all that healing, and there is a level of that still eludes me. And again, this book completely reinforces the fact that the particular circumstances of my childhood have that effect, that it is a very deep wound. That sounds really pretentious, doesn't it? But it's reassuring from that perspective to read that, because it's so easy to get really, really disheartened. I'm always very excited when I hear about other people's healing, and then it leads to a level of because hasn't happened for me, can't sit, I've worked so hard, and then the whole victim mentality, but I've tried so hard, I've done everything, I've been doing this for years. Specifically, this book, it talks about parents, which I think as a generation, our parents were slightly more emotionally immature than perhaps we were, and our children will be. There is a level of that. People wasn't encouraged to talk about your feelings and that, and their parents probably even more so. So we have to forgive our parents some level of ignorance. But what this book is talking about is there are 4 different types of these parents, and my mother, I can't remember all the different categories in that, but it listed her in its entirety, and every sort of comment that it made, the examples they used, I was like, oh my god, like I'd forgotten. What it did do for me though was what it talked about, it hadn't got to the bit about how I can help myself through this, but it was more that as an adult, or that these children are desperately lonely because their fundamental caregiver is unavailable to them, so they stop asking, they stop trying, they have nobody to turn to, and quite often because of that situation, even siblings won't necessarily, because it'd be interesting to see how my sister and I have resulted differently from the same experience. But in a family like that, because I don't know where to place my father in this other than absent, because I can't actually fit him into one of those categories, but he was effectively absent, and he was there, and he was a good father, but emotionally unavailable to us and never present. But where we're going with this loneliness is not something I've explored, but it may be just another word for something that I don't understand. So it says that basically the child can never get any comfort or anything, like in all situations in life, the child would go to the parents for that reassurance, comfort. And if you're not getting that, but it also says that as a sensitive child, which I was, that you then become actually more emotionally mature than your parent at a very, 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 very young age. And then you start, and that's when the sensitivity, then, you know, you're trying to anticipate, you then taking ownership for the relationship, and you turn into a people. So it's really annoying. I never get any, why is it that people like pod you constantly as soon as you're on the phone? Sorry, my phone's buzzing. You know, that you then take ownership of the relationship, and basically it says a lot of people turn into them people pleasers, because that's the only way that you can, that's not how you build, and exactly my words again, that's how you build your entire self-worth, because that's all your different types of parents manipulate you. But in my case, of how useful I was to my mother and what I could do, and all my self-worth is built on that. And it says you can, depending on you as a child, can grow up to be extremely successful, because I consider myself to be reasonably successful, maybe not right at the moment, but you know, I've had a good career, and I own my own house, and I'm married, and I don't have children, but that was my choice, etc., etc. That on the outside you can have a very successful life, but just not understand why you're not happy, because there is still this enormous sense of loneliness, and it is because you have never been loved, and you have no concept of what that is. You don't know how to expect it, and you don't ask for it, and you can't receive it because you have no experience of it. So it pretty much summed up everything I've learned in myself up to this point. So from that perspective, it's been very useful. I'll see how helpful it becomes as I pass through the book. But I guess what we were talking about, what started this, is how the effects of your parents continue to affect you through your adult life. So you wanted to share a bit on that, Julie? I'm just going to turn my light on so I'm not sitting here in the dark.
So I was just listening to, so Gabor Mate is I believe, I don't know if I'm going to get all of his titles right, but he's researched trauma. He's talked a lot about trauma, written about trauma. I do believe he's a doctor. I could be wrong.
Yes, I think he is.
I think so too. But his whole work has been on trauma and whatnot. And he's recently written a book, which I haven't read. I have a whole place on the library. So when it comes through, it's called The Myth of Normal. He's been on several of my favorite podcasts talking about it. But this week he's on, there's the Omega Institute in Rhinebeck, New York, which was started by Elizabeth Lesser. That's where I first met our teacher. It's a fabulous place. But he and his son, Daniel Mate, have done a workshop together, and have been doing workshops together. And so they're on the Omega podcast talking about their work, and what they had made this comment that kind of was, when Kate and I were talking about this week's episode, it reminded me then that parenting and children, or parents and children, want, or at some point, I guess, want some type of equal relationship, as we want many of our relationships to be equal. But what happens is, when you're born, you're here because you're an infant, you can't take care of yourself, and your parents are here and they're taking care of yourself, and you're to listen to them, and your supervisor, if you will. So that's here. And then as you age, there may come a point where you're equal, but at the same time, your parents are aging, and so you become the caregiver. And so this relationship, it's really hard, if ever, to be equal, because there's always this dynamic. But what's really interesting is that you go from here to here and you cross over. And so they were talking about how do you ever get to equal? What does that mean before it switches again, if you even have the opportunity to get to here? And the two of them have done a lot of work on their own relationship, as well as them learning how to, or continually educating people how to, particularly Gabor Mate, to help work through trauma, and things like that. And Daniel he calls himself a chiropractor, even though he's not, I guess, a chiropractor, but he's a chiropractor where he's helping people understand their inner self and creativity and whatnot. There was a really cool way that he described it, which I'm not going to remember right now because I just listened to it and it's not all stuck in my brain. But what I thought was really interesting about this whole parent dynamic is, as I look at my own dynamic with my parents, both my parents are still alive, and I'm recently moved back to be closer to them because as they age and health and whatnot, just to make sure that there's somebody, I mean, my sister's here, but that there's just, we're around them to help care for them when needed. But going through soul level intuitive coaching training in the last couple years leading up to me moving back, I uncovered a lot of, I hesitate to say the word trauma because I don't feel worthy to say the word trauma. Like that's
I know, and I think that's true of all people who've suffered, Julie.
Yeah, I mean,
it doesn't matter how minute or extreme it is. None of us, it's not even shame. It's more about I don't deserve that attention. There's something special about me. Everybody suffered.
Yeah, exactly. And so I know that some of the negative, I mean, clearly many of the negative beliefs I have, there's aspects that the germination of those negative beliefs started with my parents. Why and how and all that stuff, that's all work that Kate and I, as we go through this training, we uncover and learn even more about. And so I learned a lot about particularly my mom, but there's stuff in there about my dad too. And what's interesting is that I was thinking that as we have that, oh, this is the child, this is the parent, as we have that dynamic, I was thinking, oh, well, I'll move back to Michigan and we'll have the opportunity to do this. And I'm not going to get that opportunity because health issues are already taking over. And I'm already getting moved to some degree into a caretaker role. Although they don't necessarily want that, which is that's a whole other dynamic. But I just find it interesting because I'm never going to have the opportunity to have this.
But see, this triggers me slightly, interestingly, because and it is because it's through my filter, because I get actually triggered when I watch adverts where there's some dear old lady and then daughter comes in and they have a nice chat and all that, and I'm like, fuck off, because that never fucking happens, because I don't know, maybe that does exist. But I get, so this is through my filter. But there is in a lot of the books I've read, there is all this, how then do you get to this relationship? And I would say that the vast majority of times, I'm sorry, Julie, but the vast majority of times you ain't gonna ever. And it's almost like, and a lot of these books end up saying that, whether there's trauma, your parents are not necessarily people you would pick out of a crowd to be friends with, right? You're lucky that you can tolerate each other. What you have is, this is me speaking, not the books, but you have a lot of history together and a lot of it probably isn't pleasant. This idea that you can come together, there's a bit of me that goes, why would you want to? It's great that you can be civil, but I don't know, maybe that's just my filter, Julie, of I suppose it is, and there is, I can feel it coming up. There is a huge resentment that anyone should try and turn it into roses and flowers and sweetie pie and all of that, because I guess there's a bit of me that thinks, really, is any of it like that? I mean, I can appreciate a lot of relationships are a lot better than mine, which actually is fine now that my mother's in a home and was very sweet to me again today. Still there's pictures of my mum where I go, oh, you're still there, aren't you? But the vast majority, she touches me now. I don't know what to do with myself. I sit there like, this is like the two hens, we got three hens. Ella is the boss. And Pink is historically always been the bottom of the pecking order. So and Nyla, they don't pick on her, but she gets pushed around the most. They're always more. And Ella will come up and clean Pink, and Pink just goes like this. She just gets completely still, as if to go, I don't know. That's how I feel like when my mom touches me. I'm sort of like, I want to respond and be warm, but I don't really know what to do. It doesn't come naturally to me at all. Anyway, sorry, I interrupted you, Julia. It's just to say that for anybody out there that does not have that relationship with their parents, it's quite healthy to learn to accept that you probably never will. And if you do, bravo. But most people don't, Julia, I don't think. Because as you say, when you get to that point where they're actually listening to you as an equal, their needs are different, and now you're taking a different role.
Yeah. And I think when you said all that too, it just made me think that if I were consistently trying to make a relationship that isn't there, I can see how that would cause additional, I'll say in the Buddhist frame, like pain and suffering on my end, because it's something that I want, I have that attachment to the outcome. It's probably not going to happen and I can't let it go. So I can see that kind of aspect to it. For me, I know that I was kind of hoping that I could have conversations with her about her history and her family background, just to have even broader context. Because part of, I think, what for me is helpful about soul level intuitive coaching is that we get this broader context of, at least this, like I said, for me, I get this broader context of what happened in a time that I may not have a specific, tactile memory of. But I get a larger picture painted. And I was hoping we could kind of talk about that. However, my mother's health doesn't necessarily allow for those types of honest, frank conversations. And I don't even know if just relationship dynamic, if it ever would have happened anyway, but I just find it interesting. So that then to me gives me a different path and a different opportunity in that I can just let go. And then if I even think about all the books that we have read in book club, of like A Journey of Souls or Ainsley MacLeod's The Instruction, and we learn that, we signed up to come into this life the way, with these lessons that we wanted to go for. We have these people that we created contracts with to help us, people and animals that we created contacts with to help us move through that. And I think part of that contract is, it is to some degree it is what it is. It is what it was. She had her struggles. My dad has his struggles. I had mine. And just knowing that we're all humans in this. And I think allowing that just release of expectations possibly, which I'm not saying I've done completely, right? Because I still run up against it. Like, well, why won't you? Because I even expect, like, why won't you let me help you? Why won't you let me take you to the doctor? I want to hear, they don't want me involved right now because they still want to be independent. So there's still that dynamic too. But anyway, there is this opportunity for surrendering, letting go, acceptance of what has happened, who they are in relation to me. And more importantly, just like my feelings around all of it, which can be there's a sadness to it, as you can hear kind of in my voice, but there's also, you let go of that burden kind of too. I think maybe that's where I am. I don't know, just a thought.
I think, they say that the first time you realize your parents aren't special or whatever, it comes as a shock. I think I knew from a very early age that my parents were lacking, but I guess this is part of like the unconditional love that you were talking about last week, is a realization that everybody without exception is doing the best they can with what they've got, and it may not suit us and it may not be the way we would do it and all of, but nobody does things intentionally badly, or and even if they do deliberately do things that we think perhaps are motivated by fear, it's because they're motivated by fear, and it's because they think it's the right thing to do under those circumstances. So even things, if we believe that somebody's wronged us, that person has made a choice somewhere along the line, usually, unless they're emotionally unintelligent, which we come back to, but they've made those decisions because they think that's the right thing to do, and those are the choices they've made. And the surrender, I guess, comes in the I was going to say fait accompli. I don't think that's quite the right word, but it's just an understanding that they did what they did because they were doing their best with what they had at the time, and that whether or not that suits you, that's what they did. Mm-hmm. So I guess the acceptance comes with A, it's already happened and there's no point picking it apart, and B, maybe surrender is the bit where you go, and they did it for reasons that I may never understand, but I need to be okay with this because it is. Someone else told me that's something really powerful, but I think it was Matt Kahn, but the way it was very cleverly written, it's like things can never be anything than what they are because they just are. Which you sort of, well, that's obvious, but he wrote quite cleverly around it. But it's just like, it just is, you know, and there comes a point where you just have to go, it just is, and it could not ever be any other way because it is.
Yeah. It's when you talked about the moment when you realize that your parents aren't that special. I don't, it's so interesting when I look back, when you said that, it reminded me of my dad. He had a stroke 3 years ago. What year am I? 3.5 years ago. Fully recovered and fine to some degree now. But it was interesting because in his recovery, when I came home from Alaska for 2.5 weeks to help with my mom, and to help navigate my dad's healthcare and whatnot. And I realized and I'm at this point, I'm what, do you have 52, something like that? I realized that this was the first time I realized my dad does not like confrontation. He is a non-confrontational human being. I never knew that. There was I don't even remember what it was, but I remember looking at my mom one night and I said, Dad doesn't like confrontation, does he? Oh gosh, no, he'll do anything to get first time, never realized it. I'm like, oh, interesting. Yeah. And then I found out 2 weeks ago, my sister and I were having a conversation and she made a comment about, oh, when mom and dad bought us cars. And I went, what? And she said, mom and dad bought us our first cars. And I said, wait, what cars are we talking about? Because when we were in high school, my parents did buy us I want to say it was $500 Ford Fiesta when we were first learning to drive. Like that car, yes, absolutely. But she was referring to when we got our first jobs out of college and the first cars that the cars we bought, like, ourselves. And she's like, oh yeah, mom and dad, they bought me that little Mazda, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, yeah, they did it for you. And I'm like, no, they didn't. No, they didn't. Yeah. And then as I was asking, at first I was like, okay, so this explains some things about the differences between me and my sister. I'm the older, she's the younger. There were many things that she had access to that I did not when I was older. The rules ease with the younger child. So, but now I find out that they bought her first real brand new car when she was out of college, which was not for me, nor would I want it. That's the other thing. Like when we moved into this house, we borrowed some money so we could finish a fence, and I just paid them back. And it makes me proud to be able to, I want to clear this debt.
I would take anything that I could get from my parents.
I just know.
I believe I've earned it, Julie. It's taken me a long time to get there. Fucking give me the works, please.
Okay, we're going to come back to that because that was another conversation I just had with my sister last night. Anyway, but I prefer, I don't want to take, there's also a legend in my family that my paternal grandmother loaned my parents money and then kept a notebook about when she loaned it, how much she loaned, and the interest rate. And would continually ask my parents. And this story was always given to me when I was growing up. So I think, and there's a whole peacemaker role that I have in this family too, because of that same grandparent. Anyway, that's a whole other thing. But so I don't want anything. So anyway, my sister tells me this, the cars that mom and dad bought. And I'm like, what? No. And I'm like, that never happened to me. And so, but it created this expectation in my sister that then she has to do the same for her kids, which is her story. That's a thing. I'm not going to go there. And for me, I'm like, everybody pays their own way. You figure out what you need. You can ask for help, but you got to learn.
Your cynics would say, yeah, but you don't have children, Julie, so you wouldn't understand. Because I have a lot of friends like that, and I'm like, you don't need to give them anything. Your children don't need that. Like, if people seem to make, I would agree with you. I'm with you on all fronts. We were a family who never borrowed money. We never get all those things. So it is completely alien to the way I was brought up to say, fucking bring it on. But I've looked after my mom for so long and done so much work for her that, but I would always make sure it would always be fair. Like whatever I've taken from my mom, my sister gets, and vice versa. And actually, my mom was very fair like that. Anyway, her money's all gone into the home anyway, so it's irrelevant. But had I known a way to defraud fucking inherit nursing home fees or whatever and put it all in my bank account, I would have done. actually I probably wouldn't, because I'm too obedient and I'm too law abiding, but in principle I feel I'm entitled to every penny I can get from her, because she doesn't need it now. I wouldn't have taken it off her,
Yeah.
you know, if she anyway,
Yeah.
but
what's so
if your parents offer you money, take it, Julie. Thank you very much, and take it.
absolutely. Yes. I thought it was a loan, so I'm going to treat it as a loan. What I thought was interesting though, when we talk about like learning more about my parents and not having them on the pedestal, is I had always thought that mom treated us equally. Clearly that is not the case.
So did I. I'm not going to dig into that because that will really upset me.
Yeah. And well, it's so interesting because my sister tells me the story and I'm thinking, what? No, really? And so then I was asking my guides about it too, because they were saying, remember back then, my mom's the one that taught us all about finances and household finances and stuff like that. She was the finance minister of the house. She's the one that made sure we got through college. She's, but I just realized, I'm like, oh, mom controlled the purse strings. So mom would give things to Brenda that she may not give to me. Now, she may have had reasons for it, but at this point, and I do think it's because of the work we've done on soul level intuitive coaching, instead of me being, well, oh my God, you gave more to her than you gave to me, I'm more like, oh, isn't that interesting? Because I am.
And also the circumstances might have been different.
Yeah. Well, and I'm daddy's girl, and I know that caused friction with my mom. And so maybe this is what I don't know. All these things, these little paths, little tendrils, when I was having this conversation with my guides. And for me, I was just more like, oh, well, okay, it is what it is, right? I can't change it. It's what happened. But doesn't, I can't even ask her about it. She won't remember, my mother. So, but what does it matter anyway? I'm fine. I have everything I need. I have things that I want. It doesn't matter. But I'm really grateful, I guess, for this work that we do, because it allowed me to just kind of take that step back and go, well, good for you. I'm so glad that you had that experience, sister.
It's another evidence, like we were talking last week about you know, when you meet people you haven't seen for a long time and you realize you actually don't want to have those sort of conversations. It's like that. Like I must admit, there's things that would have killed me to discover that I now, I'm whatever, and I just find it a lot easier to go, you know, there's probably reasons for it, and maybe that's a form of surrender. Hello, well done, Kate. You know, or you never. I think the biggest thing, and it's so hard, is realizing you might never know stuff. Like this, I watched so many drama and crime programs. I don't know why I end up with them, because I don't know what's on, so I don't know what's coming. So just, something safe, or police drama, right? That's safe. I'll watch that, because there's so much stuff I don't want to watch because I get upset by it. Not saying that I don't get upset with police drama, but it's not emotional, at least. And so many people want revenge for something that's happened. And I just think, and I don't know, I realize that I'm talking out my arse. I haven't had somebody close to me murdered or killed in a road accident or anything like that. But I know that I would have been one of those people who would have been consumed with justice. And I know now that you may never get that justice. And even if you do find out who it is and you do get them committed, or whatever the word is, punished or whatever, people who actually manage to do that say that it doesn't really solve anything at all. It's almost like you're just not dealing with what's happened because you're focusing on that and stuff like that. So I'm just very grateful, as you say, that I have learned that these things don't bring you the getting angry about things, getting upset about the past, trying to fix things, trying to understand, trying to get to the bottom of things. Very rarely brings you the satisfaction you think it will.
Yeah. I'm more curious, I think, about why I react the way I do, and then understanding the stories behind the reason why I react that way. Like that, to me, it's just interesting, because when I look at this whole thing called humanness or humanity or being human, whatever, and just how complex it is, and how many times we have a choice to make between fear and love, as we've talked before. And it's just interesting to me. And I'm presented with it every single day. I can react to you know, I watch my sister in particular, or even my parents. Well, I guess my whole family will say, like, I'm just still picturing a conversation around a dinner table, and the choices that were made to react to something that ultimately means absolutely nothing. Like how it was about how different people live their lives, and just the reactions that people had. And it's just like, what is it? Everybody's just trying to get along, like, and not even get along with each other, just trying to make it through the day in a very complicated and attention grabbing, all the things kind of life, a very disconnected way, a disconnected life. Cut some people some slack kind of a thing. And that to me is, I find it interesting about why people do that. I was at another family gathering, different family, but different, it was still a family gathering a couple of weeks ago. And the idea of naming, doing a land acknowledgement, where you, at least here for sure in the United States, hopefully, I don't know, we do it in Alaska. It's starting to happen, I think, a little bit more here, where you say you acknowledge the land, you acknowledge the people on whose land you are standing.
You did that. I know you did that in the notes, don't you?
Yeah, so I'm on Peoria. I acknowledge I'm on Peoria, the ancestral home of the Peoria and Odawa people. Anyway, and there's a whole practice around it. But it came up that this, like, why are we doing this? This, and I didn't bring this up. Someone else brought this up. Why are we doing this? This is silly. Blah blah blah. And I'm like, but aren't you even just curious about the history of where you're standing right now? If nothing else, regardless of how you feel about making amends to the people that came before you, to the indigenous people in particular. Even to African Americans, that's a different story. But even if you aren't willing to go to that level to make amends, are you at least not curious to understand on what you're standing? And that to me also relates into the stories on which I'm standing, of people, my mom and my dad and my grandparents and whatnot. Yeah.
What's interesting is you said that, I wish I had the book down here, but it's upstairs because it's so cold down here that I've been hiding in the living room upstairs. It said that one of the ways that there were two things that, although children may react differently, they called them an introverted way or an extroverted way, where introverted children that try to understand by looking at themselves and their reaction, trying to work out what's going on, and then there's extroverted where they might end up expecting the rest of the world to fix them. So being me, I've taken it upon myself to fix myself. Other children in the same situation will then expect the world to take care of them. But it said, but one thing that's common amongst all children that experience this is their, I can't remember what I call it, healing dream. They have a healing dream, and they have a self role, or a role of self. So like my role of self would be that I became the fixer. Not provider is probably too strong a word for the child, but I was a scapegoat of the family, and I fixed everything. I was a peacemaker, and I did all the stuff, and then that became more practical as I got older. But the healing dream, I really struggled with. There were three well, there was more questions, but the first three on the first page, and one of them, and I think it's because of all the work I've been doing, that I actually cannot get to it, because it was basically, it's whatever fantasy you had as a child, that if people were more this, or what I need is a person who this, and I can't answer those questions. And I don't know if it's because I don't wish those things. Like, I just don't. I probably when I'm in the height of some emotional battle, or something's happened and I'm annoyed, I'm irritated, I can probably answer those questions. But like in general, it was things like, I wish that people were more. What do you think? Just like, it's like, I don't know. And
like, how would I answer that question? I wish people were more. And am I talking just my family, or talking people in general?
Just in general, and it's supposed to be right off the top of your head.
Kind.
Okay.
Kind.
Okay.
Yeah.
There was another one. What was it? Oh, this isn't good TV, is it? I'll bring them down next time. But it really threw me, because I was like, I can say I've got it written down in my book, but I didn't bring my book either. I've had to write them down, because I just can't think what the answers are. Like what, or what I want most in a person is, and I'm like, I don't know, maybe it's not because I've done the healing work. Maybe I'm just not in touch with that side of me. That maybe there's more work there as to. you know, I just like, I just can't remember, or I just can't access that at all. I don't know. Interesting.
You should ask your guy. I feel like, because I feel like the guy just popped a word in my head for the second question too, which was for me, empathy. But I wonder if the guides could help you with it too.
Maybe.
Yeah.
It's just because it said don't think too much about it, and I was like, ugh, and I was like, oh, I can't. So just like nothing. And I can't. I think I've done so much healing around that. It's difficult for me to. I can see pictures and feelings, and when I hear the words, a lot of the examples she uses are phrases exactly as my mother would have used about things. Like exactly, it's like uncanny. I'm like, oh my god, that's too freaky. Like it's like all these bastard mothers out there, and they use these words. It's like, but I can't. You know, so I can relate to specific incidents, but I can't remember. I don't remember feeling lonely. I remember feeling very misunderstood, but that a lot of that was with irritation and anger, which I can't muster up anymore. But
yeah,
a lot of anger at being so unjustly treated. But I can't remember feeling lonely. I can't remember feeling unloved. I don't recall that. I probably had different words for it.
yeah. I don't remember feeling that. I remember I would read Nancy Drew books. I try to see if I could read one in a day, which I can. It's only 176 pages. Every single book is 176 pages. It was a
Is
whole,
it?
yeah.
Didn't know that.
Yeah. Well, it's because when I was younger, and that's what I would do as my escape was Nancy Drew. I quickly realized, oh, look, they're all 176 pages. Oh, look, there's like a
Oh,
formula, which is fine.
that's a lot of editing to be very precise, isn't it?
I don't know. I just realized this was the hard when they were hardbound and they had the yellow spine. I don't know if the paperbacks that are now and the new Nancy, I don't know if it adheres to that, but back in the late 70s, early 80s, yeah, late 70s more. That's anyway. But yeah, I would just retreat to my room and read. Like that was my escape, and still is for many, is just to read and go somewhere else. But I always felt, but the misunderstood, that makes sense to me. I always felt misunderstood. I was always the one that brought home the weird movies and the weird books and had the weird thoughts and and even now, like, so we have mice in our house. And we had dinner with my parents on Sunday night, and I gave my parents a mouse update, and because my dad thinks just kill them, and I'm like, can't do it. There's another way. I know there's another way, and I'm supposed to find another way. So anyway, but I could tell that my dad and Brad, who were on the other side of the table from me and my mom, they were about, well, just throw some poison and whatever. Just when she's not looking, you just go ahead and take care of it. And I pretended in the moment that I didn't hear them. And I forget now where I was going with this, but anyways, but afterwards I said to Brad, I'm like, I heard everything he said. Oh, you did? I'm like, well, I was sitting right there. Yeah.
Your cloak of invisibility wasn't working.
So I said, I hope that's not what you're planning on doing. I hope you were just humoring my dad, which he said he was. So, but I don't even remember where I was going with this. Oh, yeah. See, I'm the weird one because I'm like, my dad just like, he looks at me like, just kill him. They're good. And he brings out all the arguments, the status quo arguments of that they are going to bring death and destruction and disease. And I'm like, they're this effing big. Yes, there are days when I've caught several. Yes, there are days when I've caught one. So, I'm just curious about how all this could play out in a good, positive.
There's a very simple solution to your problem.
Well, I'm allergic to cats, if that's what you're telling me.
You can get hairless cats.
Yeah, no. I wouldn't hesitate to get a cat because Lucas loves cats in a good way. Don't mean anything mean, and I don't mind. I like cats. And we were just somewhere where we stayed with somebody that had a cat, and we thought we were going to be okay. Yeah, we weren't. So neither Brad wasn't either. So we just couldn't breathe. That's an issue.
It could be, but the mice would love that if you all died, and the mice would take over the house and live happily with Lucas forever.
I know. Yeah. So I don't know.
That's probably a good place to end, Julie.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, the effects of parents, the lingering effects of parents, and the current day mouse situation.
I get to say goodbye. Right. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm Kate Foggo. This is Julie Hurt. Together we are making light to humans beings. We will put stuff in the show notes down here. You can follow us here on YouTube. If you subscribe, you'll get notified of new episodes. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And if you have any questions, suggestions for topics, anything you want to say, just put it in the comments below. And we will respond to you. So thank you for being with us, and good night. Good night, good day, good evening, good, just good.
Yes, just good. Oh, and don't forget, next week's episode is with Danielle McKinnon in person. Yep. So stay tuned for that.